everyone. Plus, we had a last-minute crew change, as I'm sure all of you know, and we thank you for being able to adjust, and we encourage facilities to make that change. But thank you all for being here. Good to see you. Look forward to today. My name is Henry Harder, prof from the School of Health Sciences, and I'm also the Aboriginal Environmental Health Research Chair and the co-lead for the Health Research Institute. So the Health Research Institute and sponsors. Didn't change. Oh, I thought that it's not broadcast. Is it? Anybody see anything up there?
Yeah.
All right. I'm glad we discovered that now. So these are the sponsors of the School of Health Sciences, of course, School of Nursing, School of Social Work, Northern Medical Program, Psychology Program, and Sunlight Financial. We get some money through the Ward Program or whatever it's called. So that's a really nice thing to have. And we have a number of these throughout the year. What is it? No. This is what I don't do either. And they hit the most. Wow, you know. So this is just to show you what's coming up, and I think this is on our website as well. So I'll refer you to the website and you can see what you're interested in attending and plan for the future on that. And of course, Rachel will be sending you various emails as we go along as reminders. So I think it's probably impossible to miss what's coming up. And without, we have my friend Judy standing here, and I'm going to introduce her in a minute. So right now, I'd like to invite Darlene McIntosh up to come and do the opening for us. And Darlene has done this many times, and I always appreciate what you do for us. Thank you, Jay.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and it's going to be an exciting presentation. I'll get you all to stand, please. So I recognized a few faces from the college that have come up and are now starting their next journey up here, and so I'm so happy to be able to be here to support them also. So I'm here as a representative elder ambassador with Clayton Nation, and it's absolutely my honor to be able to give you a traditional welcome to our traditional territory. Take a nice deep breath into your feet and ground and connect with Mother Earth, who sustains your life here on this earth plane. I'm sure Adosi's nervous, so she better really breathe into her face. We, the Clayton Nation, have been on our traditional lands over 9,000 years and supported by living evidence. The changes that have taken place over thousands of years support the enduring strength, courage, and fortitude of our people. Our governance is a balance and harmony with our brothers and sisters of other First Nations people. Clayton clans are Frog, Cecilia, Grouse, Susu, Beaver, Sa, and Bear, Sa. Through this system, we know where our family connections are. Through our oral history, the use of legends told of our travels, our hunting and fishing territories, our trading practices with all people. So you remember and hold steadfast in what Creator's blessed us with, and that is our traditional territory. Our ancestors have always welcomed people to our territory. On behalf of Clayton Canadian elders, our youth, community members, and Chief and Council, it is absolutely our honor to welcome each and every one of you to our traditional territory. All my relations, much peace. Thank you. Please be seated.
conference for years, actually. So it's my great privilege and pleasure to introduce those. I feel very responsible that you were here. In the sense that I was on the hiring committee that brought you to this university. And I know the struggle it was and it seems to be to do the things that you do and to be here and present for us. I appreciate that very much. Those people are Dr. Judy Thompson, to the dominant cultural people want to think of that. Those is Talpan Language and Cultural Director, as well as an assistant prof, soon to be associate at UNC. So it is my great pleasure to welcome you. Wish you well today. I know there are panel members too, but she will introduce the panel once we get to that part of the presentation.
Tenés por día, yo escucho, Altipan Dennis, OT, Sophia Esther Epping, the Bonatina de OT, City. So as Henry said, my name is Adolphe, which means someone who raises up Texan children. My English name is Judy Thompson, and like Henry said, I have two full-time jobs. One is, the job that's senior and dear to my heart is the language and culture director for my nation. And I'm really working hard. It's actually seems to be working where I'm getting to do more of my language work in my position at UNC. I'm really grateful for it. And I would just like to thank the Big Canadian Nation for allowing me and my fellow language learners to share our stories about our language learning journey and how it's affected our lives. But before I get started, I need to situate myself. I'm going to quickly tell you who I am and what I said in my language. What I said in Talpan State was who I am and where I'm from, the way of locating myself, a way of identifying my voice. Okay. DC, I tell you. We need to put the mic on. Everybody, okay, all right. Check. Okay. So I'll just tell you that the bag I'm putting this was a bag that was given to my grandfather when he turned 100 years old, made by one of my cousins, Linda Bob. And I'll show you a picture of my grandparents in a minute. But, so you see my button blanket here. On the side are my clans, Sophia or Crow, and on the back is Tekwacha, which is frog. So this is the territory where my name comes from, Toronto. So if you know our language and you know our names, then you know what those two come from this territory, Toronto, which is also known as the Sacred Headwaters. This is where I was born and raised in Prince Rupert on Sinstan territory. You see the little mosquito there grabbing the fur? That's my dog's fur, taking it for their neck. This is my mother and father. So my mom is here today. Catherine Thompson. Wait, Mom. So her name is Lisette, and that's my dad, who is to be a San Nation. And his grandmother used to call him Thompson in Miguel. Anyways, it means whitehead. He has platinum blonde hair as well. This is his mother, and my granny was fluent keeper of our language, but I didn't know that till after she passed away. So that's sort of what I want to talk about today is why did that happen? Why didn't she feel free to share her language? And these are my grandparents, my mother's parents, Shaw and Aneka, Charles and Julia Culbert. And they were my teachers, my best friends. They're the ones that really, once I showed an interest in my language, my culture, they just took me, like I said, just before I was like a grandchild, but then they became my best friend. And we traveled all the time together. They brought me to meet with other elders, a lot of my friends and family. I really learned so much from them. And just to quickly show you, that's where my territory is, the Calhoun territory. Kingston territory where I grew up, and where I still make my home as well on the Canadian territory. And I quickly wanted to show you this map. This is a map of Canada and all of the different language families, Indigenous language families. So there are 11 in total. In British Columbia, we have at least 7 to 8 of those language families, but 34 languages out of 60 are in Canada, or sorry, in British Columbia. So what I wanted to share with you is this framework I developed. So the beginnings of this framework came from my doctoral research, where I was looking at how do we revitalize the Tahltan language. And so I looked at all the different things that needed to be done, and I brought it together into this framework, into this drawing. But when I was doing my research, I was talking to David Rattray, who is a relative of Louise Framps, one of my elders, and he told me how important it was to also make sure that we talked about healing, that connection with language and healing. So you can see at the bottom here, the well-being, that actually should be well-being, healing, yeah, that's okay. But what I realized is if we don't have those roots, if we don't deal with the health and healing and well-being, the tree will die. It's not going to prosper. So we need to make sure we deal with that part of the tree. So I'm going to look at the connection between language revitalization and healing. And I'm going to share with you something that David Rattray told me when I was interviewing him for my doctoral research. So what David said was, the amount of emotional pain that exists is so horrific that I personally, when we talk about language revitalization, we have to factor in a huge healing component. I believe you need to have a huge focus on healing if you're going to revitalize the language. Language is too difficult to learn and use with all the pain elements that flow through our world. And I'm hoping I'll be able to play this little clip that I want you to hear his voice.
There's so much pain in our nation that language revitalization, while it's a lot of verbal, we better do it. When you sit back and watch and try to implement, it's extremely difficult because there's too much pain in our community. I believe you need to have a huge focus on healing if you're going to revitalize the language. Language is too difficult to learn and use, etc., with all the pain elements that flow through our world.
So when I was, looking at the kind of things that we needed to do to revitalize our language, I hadn't thought about it, but he made me realize that this was so important. So part of the, what we need to do is, first of all, talk about why is there so much pain in our communities, and how is it affecting our ability to revitalize our languages? So in terms of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, it states, the importance of truth-telling in its own right should not be underestimated. It restores the human dignity of victims of violence and calls governments and citizens to account. Without truth, justice is not served, healing cannot happen, and there can be no genuine reconciliation between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples in Canada. So I wanted to share with you some of the voices of my elders who I interviewed back when I was doing my doctoral research. So Janet Vance is one of our Telton elders. She's a fluent speaker of our language, and she's a retired language teacher. She also still teaches in the Head Start program. Very sad though, Janet actually just lost her house in the fires that came to our community of Telegraph Creek, so she's now living in Terrace for now. Her daughters lost their homes too, so as well, we have a lot of healing to do from that as well. What Janet said is, they tried to change us. They want us to be like them, you know. They didn't want our ways. They wanted Indians to be like them. But they couldn't change us, you know. That's why they did that to all the schools, I think, even the residential schools. And then she goes on to say, it was against the law because they threatened these old ladies. They don't know English. They only talk their language on the street. And then this RCMP walked up to them and told them that if you don't quit speaking your language on the street, I'm going to throw you in jail. So that was against the law. And when I hear people, those old people talking, I just wanted them to quit because I thought it was wrong. It was what I was taught and I didn't like it. I was afraid for them. And our elder, Patrick Carlett, who passed away from this time, he said, so he's talking about my grandpa's cousin. Because Emma Brown, your grandpa's cousin, he told us, a policeman came around and told them, don't you speak your language to your kids, speak as much as you can English. So you can see that obviously this happened in residential schools, but it was everywhere. Just trying to make us feel ashamed of who we were and that we were lesser, our languages were lesser, we were lesser. And Janet again states, it was my first language until I went to school. I was 6 years old, and me and my sister went to school at the same time, and we weren't allowed to speak our language. So that's how we lost it, most of it, eh? I used to go home, and I'm so proud I learned English, talked to my grandparents in English, and Grandpa got mad at me. And when I got to school and speak my language, the teachers get mad at me. It was a little bit confusing, you know? I just think, what am I doing wrong? I can't do nothing right. So that's how it all started. And it's how our language been lost, you know? The government is responsible for that. So here's Janet at the age of 5, you know, learning another language, but no matter what she speaks, she's getting in trouble for it, you know? So I want to talk about how this intergenerational trauma has affected language revitalization, because this has been passed down, this feeling of shame, not teaching your children your language. Like my grandparents did not teach my mother and her siblings the language. I didn't get taught as a child, as a baby. I started learning it in my 20s because I wanted to. I started asking my grandparents to teach me. So I want to start with this because I want to end on a positive note, but I want to get into how the effects of colonization and assimilation have affected our language learning. So one thing that I learned from my doctoral research was that not only were students returning from residential school, they were embarrassed or they were afraid to speak their language, but they also took on the role of the oppressor to their own people. It was a form of indoctrination in which practices of the oppressors continue long after the oppressed are no longer under their control. And so this is also a form of lateral violence. So I've got a definition here, and this is from the First Nations Health Directors Association. Lateral violence occurs when we direct our feelings of dissatisfaction towards one another, rather than recognizing that the true adversaries are colonization, internalized racism, or feeling oppression in other forms. And this form of lateral violence is expressed in many ways, including gossip, verbal or nonverbal assault, passive and aggressive behaviors, blaming, shaming, attempts to socially isolate others, demeaning activities, bullying, and threatening or intimidating behavior. So I've got a clip, well, I'm actually going to read it. This is something from David Rattray talking about when he was the school principal in Telegraph Creek. He also was a superintendent in Deep Lake. So he said, when the kids would learn how to say a word and tell him in school, they would have a bit of a mispronunciation sometimes. And it was unreal. Every interaction I saw where a kid used Telcan and out in the community, an older person would, an elder would say in this tone of voice, that's not how it's said. And they tell him how to say it properly while the kid just clams up, shuts up. You just watch them fade away because of the pain. Every interaction I saw, the adults put down the kids for trying to say the word because they said it incorrectly. And something that I've also heard a lot from my elders, or teachers anyways, that are teaching the language is those white kids learn our languages better than our kids. And I remember thinking, what? What do you mean? Like, I don't believe that, right? But the more I read and thought about it, when someone's learning a language and it's not their own language, especially an endangered language, one that's been taken from us, stolen from us, there's no baggage. Like if I went to learn Spanish or French or whatever, there's nothing there. I mean, it's just another language to me. But learning Tahltan, like, I grew up feeling that shame. It was there. I mean, it's just sort of underlying, but it's there for most of us. And learning your language, again, it's like, it's not as good as English. So, and I think that when the children, when they're learning it, some of them just shut it out. They don't want to learn it, you know. So, and for a non-Tahltan or a non-Indigenous person, it's like, sure, why not? I'll try this language. So in terms of intergenerational trauma, so first of all, and I've learned this from many of my elders, like Louisa Smith, who is a Haisla elder, she talked about going to residential school, and she talked about how she never learned how to parent. She learned from the nuns how to parent, and she said she used to tell her kids, you better shut up or I'm going to give you something to be quiet, or, you know, like she would say things that she realized later. That's what I heard, because I never had the parenting, you know, that I should have from my own family, from my parents, grandparents, aunties, and uncles. So that's passed down, this way of raising your children. But something I've also been learning, and I'm doing a lot of reading on it, I'm just getting into this, but the transmission of trauma can also be on a physical or a cellular level. So I've been reading this book called Trauma and Memory, Brain and Body and the Search for the Living Past. And what Peter Levine said is, trauma shocks the brain, stuns the mind, and freezes the body. It overwhelms its unfortunate victims and hurls them adrift in a raging sea of torment, helplessness, and despair. And in terms of generational transmission of trauma, he states, research over the past few years have not only chronicled the existence of such conductions, but has demonstrated some of the epigenetic, molecular, and biochemical mechanisms responsible for such transmission. So I did an undergrad degree in kinesiology. So I've got the basic, you know, first 2 years of math, physics, chemistry, biology, and then the final 2 years up to do with kinesiology, like human anatomy, physiology, biomechanics. And so this really excites me actually to be getting into this, to do more research in this area. Like I'm actually not, I don't want to actually do this research, but just to see that it's out there and then how we're going to deal with this. Some of the things I was reading, like some of the things they do to animals for this kind of research, I'm not going there. But they talk about people who have survived the Holocaust and how some of those things have passed down. There was one study where they had mice have this certain smell. I forget what the smell was. We'll just say almonds. And then they would shock them. And so then whenever they smelled almonds, they would freeze and they'd be scared, you know, they would be traumatized. That would get passed down to their children and grandchildren, even though they weren't shocked, they would be afraid of it as well. So you can see how that, you know, it gets passed down. So I just have a definition here of epigenetics. And again, like I say, I'm just starting to learn about this, but the study of changes in organisms caused by the modification of gene expression rather than the alteration of the genetic code itself. And again, when I was searching around on the internet, I came across this article that said, the bad news, trauma can be inherited. The good news, so can resilience. So I'm going to move on to resiliency. So resiliency, just from a definition I came across, the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. So in terms of the work I do at for my nation as a director, we have a language revitalization team in place. So we've got people working in all three of our communities. We have people working outside of our communities. And just, I wish I could have pulled up the picture of that tree again, but we basically focus on governance, programming, professional development and training, and documentation. So these are all the things that we do. We're trying to do all, we're trying to build capacity to do as much as we can. But the other thing we also need to do is to be aware of this trauma that's out there. And like my elder Louise could also talk about is things in our language class. Like she's been learning the language in a program with UVic for the last few years. And we discussed that, like things that happen. And sometimes things happen that you don't even know, or the person may say something. Like some of my elders have said, who are learning the language, they've had others say, sound like you're speaking Gistan. So it's like a put down in a way, because it doesn't sound like the language, like they don't understand them, So, but as David said, I mean, that could shut somebody down emotionally. But the one good thing about this program is we've become so much stronger. But a child we worry about, like that could affect a child if they get shut down like that. So what we need to do is we need to cultivate trauma awareness for our language revitalization team and for our language mentors, our elders who are fluent speakers. We need to recognize the aspects of traumatic responses. So we need to recognize them, but then what do we do? Like, we're not trained, but we need to have that training to recognize them. But then we need to also integrate healthcare professionals into the community of practice of engaging in language revitalization. So something also that I've been reading a lot about is lateral kindness. And so the definition is a way to address lateral violence that promotes social harmony and healthy relationships. It's a way of being that is aligned with First Nations values, traditional teachings, and cultural protocols about ways of treating ourselves and each other, building good relationships, and dealing with conflict. So again, in terms of practice and policy, these are just a few things. So improving individual and mental and physical health, improving health services, and addressing determinants of health and health systems change, which includes addressing colonization. So we're going to move on to the positive effects. What are the great things that have come from learning our language and from having this language revitalization program in our nation? I'm going to show you a short clip. We did a documentary on our language, which means we are speaking our language again. And it's about 64 minutes. I'm not going to show you that one. But this was really important for us to document the work we've been doing over the last 6 years and to be able to share that. And I mean, that's a part of our framework too, is getting that out there, to work with other nations and to share.
My belief is that our language is the language of God. It's a great gift, and it's a gift that's given to us from the Creator to our ancestors. And I believe it's because of our God identity.
I think it's important that we think about, language, it's been around for thousands of years, and travels with us. It's evolved over time, and language is so amazing.
It's given us hope, right? It's given us hope of who we are as people. And we see we're trying to retain our language. Never gave our lives before. Come back. That's a good feeling.
It grounds people to be able to know, speak their language, feeling emotionally, spiritually. I think in talking language revitalization is really going to bring our people together, and we can grow. Once we grow, we get stronger, as people. That's exciting. Anyway, I'm going to be part of it. I'm going to try to be part of it. I think our language and our culture is something we and
I love that last part where Patricia Louis says, we don't have our language, just like everybody else. And I think it's so important that we don't lose. I don't like using the word lose because someone didn't just, like, our languages didn't disappear. We're like, oh, where did I put it? I didn't misplace my language. They were stolen from us, right? So that word loss bothers me, actually. But I mean, I think it's just so important that we have that. It's so connected to who we are as people, as a nation. So I wanted to quickly talk to you about the Mentor Apprentice program. I've been part of this program this is my second year, and basically what it is, it's a mentor, a fluent speaker, working with a language learner, an apprentice. And they're funded through First Peoples Cultural Council. So they get funding to do 300 hours a year of language, and so but you need to be doing 10 hours a week minimum. And it's immersed in the language. It's not the way we usually learn language. It's the way we should naturally be learning languages. Not the way I learned French in high school. This is immersive. And it's hard. It's really hard to do, but it's really important. That's the only way I'm going to become more proficient in my language. So here we have Nikki Kivali and Yasna and myself. So we've all been working. We got funding from First Peoples Culture Council to do this work. There I am with Donna Ah, my mentor, Jenny Kwok. I love her so much. And then this is Nikki Tivoli. Here she is with her lovely family. And here she is with her mom, Irene French, who is her mentor. So what I'm going to do now is introduce you to some of these people who have shared their stories that weren't able to be here. So I'm just going to read it out for you. And I hope I get some of the language right for her. She says, Hadi. So it says, Nikki Tivoli. Hello, my name is Nikki Tivoli. I'm Sustudena, people of the Bearwater, Sustudena, from the Tukbuf Lake First Nation. My mother, Irene French, is a hereditary chief and has been my language mentor. We sit with a Gilles Deleuze, Frog Clan. I've been more involved in learning my language over the past 2 years, and although it has been frustrating at times, it has been very rewarding. Behind the difficult pronunciations, there lies a sort of poetic beauty which reflects our cultural morals that is deeply tied to our identity. The more I learn, the stronger and more empowered I become. It has also helped me heal. The language learning processes have unveiled the effects that residential school has on our language holders. It has shown me the tremendous amount of pain and shame that was inflicted upon them. But it has always shown me how therapeutic and healing it can be to pass the language on to others. Every time I speak my language in front of others, I feel nervous, but I also feel pride. I'm looking forward to the day when I can sit in our Botlot's house and I can join in on the laughter when our elders are sharing stories and telling jokes in our language. Thank you for listening to my story. Sorry, I didn't click on Nikki, her mother there. This is Odelia Dennis. She's Telcan. She's our language and culture manager for communities in our nation. She's also the language and culture coordinator for Deep Lake. I've always said I want to clone Odelia because I have her doing so many things. When I first came on as the director, I hired her to work in our language nest. Actually, she helped me get it off the ground. So she's done amazing work. She now teaches in our UVic program, so she's one of the instructors. She's doing her master's in Indigenous language revitalization with UVic. So I'm going to quickly read to you what she said and how MAP has impacted on her life. And there in the picture, you can see two of our elders, Regina Louis and Angela Dennis. So when I first began the MAP program, I didn't really know what I wanted to do for my career. I was contemplating giving up my job working in the environmental sector of mining and exploration. I decided to do the MAP program while still at my old job to give me some clarity. It was very demanding of my time. I worked from 8:30 to 5:30 p.m. every day, and I had a child who was only 2 years old at the time. After completing 2 hours per evening for a few weeks and then 4 hours every Saturday and Sunday, I soon realized that learning language was my passion. After that demanding time of my life, I realized that yes, I do want to find a job where I could learn and teach language. I gained my identity when I started learning my language. For something that would have been so difficult for me to do, I stood up in a room full of strangers and said a prayer in Tahltan. Whenever I have difficulties about political things, I don't allow it to bother me. There are some that don't accept the dialect that I teach, but it doesn't matter to me because at least I know one dialect of our language. It's better than not knowing any dialect. People come to me and say, so-and-so said this about Iskut people. It never bothers me anymore, and I wish more people would learn their language so that they would not allow these little things to bother them. I know that no matter where I go, no matter what anyone says, I am a Tahltan woman. I know my language, and I teach my language. I love that everywhere I go, people know me. It's cute because some kids, when they see me, the first thing they say is, Judy ate, or some of them just blurt out, Soga ate. I love that they associate language to me because language means so much to me. The children are learning that language is so important to them too. And I just wanted to share a story by Pauline Hawkins. So Pauline is also in our language program. She's a language teacher in Telegraph Creek. These were her two mentors in the Mentor Apprentice program, but since her father passed away, I think it was 2014, and her mother passed away just when we started our language program in early 2016. So for her, even though it was so hard to start the program, she knew that's what her parents would have wanted. So Pauline says, I am the little brown-skinned girl who grew up on the banks of the Stikine River. I lived in a safe world where everyone looked like me and spoke like me until the day I met a non-native family. The moment I lost my innocence and security is a vivid memory that has haunted me for many years. The pivotal moment went as such. A non-native family came to visit my parents. The children sat quietly, were well-mannered and polite. This was my first encounter with non-natives being in my home. We, the children, had no idea what to think of our parents' new friends and behaved badly. After the family left, my dad was very annoyed and said, why can't you kids be like those white kids? Look at them, they're better than you. From that moment on, I felt inferior, inadequate, and ashamed of myself for many years. I was consumed with self-hatred and low self-esteem. I lost a piece of my soul in an instant. I spent most of my life searching for something to fill the void that was left. When I was an adolescent, I used alcohol and drugs to fill the emptiness within, but it was temporary and caused more destruction and disconnection to my already fragile being. My life in Telegraph Creek was all I knew. I had no idea what to expect for the next chapters of my life where I would be surrounded by people who were different than me. When I left my safe zone of Tahltan school, I had no idea of the culture shock that I was to endure. First of all, I didn't have the security of my parents and lived with non-native families. Secondly, there were more people in the school than all of Telegraph. For the first time in my life, I was subject to racism, which I didn't understand and had no tools to deal with. The day I began teaching Tahltan language and culture is the day my healing began. Through my job, I learned that white people are people too. They have struggles just like everybody else. They aren't better than me. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders and my confidence began to grow. Today I can reflect on the positive aspects of my childhood and celebrate it. I grew up in a culture-rich home and heard our language being spoken often. Our language is spoken as a secret code, so I began paying closer attention whenever my parents and other fluent speakers were speaking. After a while, I was able to decipher a few words to get the gist of what or who they were talking about. They thought it was cute. When I was little, I enjoyed being in the presence of elderly people because they appeared to be happy and outgoing. When I look back, I think what I admired most was how happy they appeared with themselves. They also teach me our culture through their everyday lives. My family and I also spent time with our aunts and uncles who lived in Iskut and Dease Lake. We went camping together at our fish camp, the Blueberry Patch, and Clapan. Even though I was only a child, I remembered thinking what a treasure it was to spend time with them. When I was around 9, I stood watching my mom cut fish and I asked her if I could try. He was very patient and encouraging with me and very proud that I showed an interest in learning. From that day on, she took time to teach me whatever she was doing. Another fond memory I have of my mother is her feeding me off her plate. I remember standing beside my mom whenever she ate Caltan food and her feeding me. This was a gateway to my aunts and uncle's heart, as I didn't know many children in my generation who enjoyed our traditional food. I was the only one out of my siblings that shared my parents' love for our food. I learned about who I am not only through my parents, but my people too. My parents didn't practice our culture, they lived it. Today I model these teachings to my students. When I began teaching our language and culture, I had no experience in teaching. Over the years, I have worked with a lot of very supportive teachers who generously shared their knowledge with me. I feel privileged to work with our younger generation, and I work hard to ensure that they have a voice that will advocate for others. I want our children to learn who they are and where they come from, so when they leave my class, they'll be proud of themselves and be successful in whatever they do. I didn't imagine the impact of taking the language revitalization course would not only improve my teaching, but helping me find my true self. When I started the language program, it was bittersweet and life-changing. I had just recently lost both my parents and was searching for solace for my devastated soul. Through learning Caltan, I have a connection with my parents that I cherish. The road has been long and rough at times, but I didn't waver in my desire to learn my language. When I reflect on the challenges and obstacles I've overcome, I can't help but pat myself on the back and say, "Good job, Pauline. Well done." As I mentioned before, teaching is my passion, and I look forward to sharing it with my students and the school and language house. I can see myself mentoring others who want to learn our language. I'm beginning to feel more confident with speaking Caltan in public. I have a very strong support network with my family and colleagues. They too are interested in learning our language, so I look for teachable moments. My granddaughter, Everlyn, is a great inspiration. I will continue learning and speaking my languages so that I am fulfilling my promise to my parents. Learning my language is a multifaceted gem because it has enabled me to be proud of who I am as a Caltan woman. Today I celebrate my brown skin. My language is the element that has been missing in my soul, and I am elated to finally fill the void. I feel so proud whenever people say, "I heard Uncle Pat, your dad, talking when you were speaking," because my dad's legacy will continue through me and knowing that I am speaking our language well. My language journey has just begun. I will strive to learn, model, teach, and support anyone who is ready to embark on life-changing and an empowering language journey. So Pauline, her mother and my grandmother were first cousins, and they're both Tuskia. So I always call Pauline Gaza, which means younger sister. And we were talking one time, and one of my relatives from Prince Rupert, Peggy Campbell, was visiting with her mother, and they were sitting around talking Caltan and laughing and joking. So Pauline and I have made a pact that as we get older, we're going to be able to sit around laughing and talking in our language. That's our goal, so we're working towards that. So now I'd actually like to ask my panelists to come forward and introduce themselves. So Yasna and Louise. So I'm really grateful to have my elder Louise Framps here. She'll be sharing how language has affected her life, and as well Yasna, she's doing her master's in First Nation Studies this fall. She's just started. So
thank you. Louise Francis Sheila, and Grace Craig is Bertha, George, who's it? Joanne, Robin, Caltan, Justin.
My mother was Grace Craig at Bertha, which ends up that my father was, my mom's dad was connected to Judy. So we're like Churchill cousins on her dad's side. And my dad is Georgia Guta Ezerza, and that's his legal name. He didn't get registered because somehow when the Indian agent was registering births, he was my dad. So my grandmother and he went to the police station to swear out an affidavit. And they said to her, "Do you know this man?" "Yeah, sure," she said. "I borned him." So that's how it was. I'm Chiona, and I'm Kelcan. Kelcan Jacinth. I came into the language as a non-speaker, and it was not ever spoken to us in our family because my dad was a far thinker, and he said, we need to know English in this world, and therefore he and my mom talked it over and decided that they would follow the advice of the ministers at the church and the Indian agent, who believed that learning our language would learn English. Well, we know a lot differently now. So I didn't hear anything, but for some reason, and I think it's because when I was very little, they spoke in my presence all the time, is that I can say all the sounds of our language with no problem. Putting it together is different though. So I basically started as a total non-speaker and non-listener, which is very hard. It took me 14 hours to hear the difference between Wodestich and Hodestich. It was a long time learning, but I did it. So, and I come to learning differently from Judy because I'm attending classes. The sad thing is there's no one here in Prince George who speaks the language, so I'm learning on my own. And one thing about practicing is I can practice, but I have practiced a lot of mistakes. Hopefully, I can correct them more easily when I get told the correct way. So for a while, I would say mahuna, meaning I wonder who, and then I learned it's mahuna. Okay, well, that's easy, I can do that. But it took me a long time to get there. And the problem, of course, for a lot of us is we have no learning material. So I'm a retired teacher, and I retired from services to children with special needs. So I think what I look at this is it's a special need for our learners like me who have no resources. So in my master's, I am writing on the elements of our language and how to make it real for people. You know, there's probably a stack like this of papers written about our language, and nobody can understand them. Well, I can understand them now, and I take and I make it into real language. So my capstone project is going to be talking about verbs, and I've done chapter 1 as an assignment for a course, and my advisor liked it so much. She said, well, finish the chapter. You've only done the introduction. Now what? So we organized that, and it's all written for people like me. What do I need to know? What language do I speak in? And it's plain, simple English and Kelcan that all of us can understand for learning the language. And that's how I'm coming to learning language. I was one of the people who grew up without a lot of baggage. I don't know where it went. It was just my lot in life to be supported as a learner through my whole life, and I'm still being supported. And now I can go and turn around and support other people. So when we talked about all the baggage people carry into their language learning, my learning is what baggage are they carrying and how much courage it took to attend their first class, and how many of them looked at what we were doing and said, I'm out of here. And we never saw them again. And that's really bad. But we're working to make the language real in lots of ways, and hopefully they'll come back when they're ready and when they're healed enough. Okay, Madam.
So as Louise mentioned, she's doing her master's with Simon Fraser University. First Nation, what's the program
It's
called?
actually linguist. It's actually, I have actually no idea. I can't think of it. I said, I don't care what they call it, but I think it's in Indigenous languages, and it's through the linguistics department.
Right. So it is focusing on language revitalization, but through the linguistics, I guess.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Thank you.
Das heilige Glas, jasne Hanadiki Roga, Spagil de Una heilige Stoufeligen, La Hain Goose Naudiga, Slately Dene, Voyadu, Gangi Sulkaska, Albiwet Hanunangla Kiyoga. Hello, wonderful people. My name is Yasnau, and I'm from Skidegate Haidagwai, originally from the village of Una, or it's now called Skidan. I was born and raised in Prince Rupert alongside Adosi, but a little later on. And my grandmother's name is Albiwet, and I'm now attending my master's program here at UBC on Lheidli T'enneh territory. So what I do is language and story revitalization. That's my work, that's my research, that's apparently my life now. So I'm going to try to sum up my learning journey, my journey of becoming Yasnau, of finding my voice and healing through finding my voice and my identity as a Skidegate Haida woman. I'm going to tell you that story. I've got my list of notes here because I'm known to get very tangential when talking about these things. So over the past year and a half, I've spent countless hours immersed in my Skidegate Haida language with my nanai, which means grandmother, and other fluent Haida speakers at the Skidegate Haida Immersion Program, or SHIP, in Skidegate Haida Gwai. And when we're not there, we're either here at my house studying with my grandmother, or at her house in Prince Rupert where her and my parents live, although she's supposed to move in with me this fall. So hopefully that happens. So how our immersion sessions work, as Adosi was saying, was that only our language is spoken, and the aid of gestures, facial expressions, and pointing to things and taking out books is our way of communicating with each other when I can't understand what she's saying, or in a lot of cases when she can't understand what I'm saying because, for example, my pronunciation could be off. If English is to be spoken, I would say, for example, if I wanted to know what the word apple was, I would say, Gasingu apple de sudigang, and that means, how do you say apple in our language? And that would be the only time English would be spoken. These sessions can be very beautiful and transforming, but they can also be very, very, very frustrating for both myself and my nanai. So last May, Nana and I got on the ferry to Haida Gwaii to be situated on our traditional land for me to begin doing our immersion sessions. Although I had grown up hearing and learned some of the language, I was not nearly as fluent as I needed or wanted to be. As I mentioned, we attended the Skidegate Haida Immersion Program, which is also a place where the fluent elders come together, and only the language is spoken unless, for example, we're doing translations for the Skidegate Haida Dictionary, which is called which just means the Skidegate Haida voice. The only time English would be used is other than the translation is, for example, on our breaks, we discuss different things talked about in class, especially with our new learners, which at the time was me. So prior to attending our first sessions at SHIP, my nanai and she taught me different, what we call them, survival phrases. And I'm so thankful for these survival phrases. If you are going to learn your Indigenous language, make sure you know your survival phrases, which are things such as ja'aya, meaning I don't know, or asing shasuda, which means can you say that again more slowly? Those things really saved me. However, even though I knew those, it became a little bit of a mess as I described it when I first walked into ship. For example, although I knew my survival phrases, I didn't have the phrase of, where's the washroom? So there was a lot of withholding washroom urges because the elders would not speak to me in English and they would pretend not to understand me in English. So that was a highlight, but not in the best way. Further, Skidegate Haida possesses many intricate sounds not used in any other language on Mother Earth, as it's a very secluded dialect. For example, once upon a time, technology wasn't advanced enough for people on mainland or the Haidas to paddle to meet each other because it's on a secluded island in the Pacific. So the language is very intricate and specific, and learning these specific noises was difficult to the point where I had undergone, I forget what it was called, it was something to do with my diaphragm. It was too much stress on my diaphragm, and it resulted in me having hiccups for 48 hours. And I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I wanted to cry, and it's really embarrassing to show up at the hospital when you're 21 due to hiccups. So one day, we were sitting at ship and we were listening to an oral recording from one of our elders who had passed away. It was a story they were telling. And I listened carefully and I didn't think I got what they were saying because the story seemed a little bit different from ones I had known or heard. And afterwards, one of my aunts asked me, what did you get of that story? And this was at lunchtime at our break so she could see what I understood. And I shyly said, well, there was a butterfly, an insect, and a fish, and they were all in a race. And the butterfly and the insect wanted to beat the fish because the fish was kind of mean. The insect became tired halfway through the race, so the butterfly allowed the insect to ride on his hangusdaguchi, his eyelashes, and they finished the race together. And I told that to her, and she looked surprised, and she said, that's right, that's exactly right. And from that moment, it was almost as if my entire worldview shifted. Things that didn't make sense made sense, and things that made sense once no longer made sense. I'm still learning a lot, and I still have barriers and difficulties to overcome, but in that regard, the best way I can explain it, it just made sense. It's like when you're struggling with a math question, and no matter what you do, you can't solve it. Then suddenly you look at it from a different perspective, and it just makes sense. It seems like you didn't even have to try for it to make sense. The world, in my opinion, is not what I saw it to be before. The world is not what I saw it to be up until last May, when I started serious immersion sessions. Learning my language not only provided me with my identity, but it directly connected me to my land, ancestors, and world. My ancestors listen to me speak every day, and I know they are proud. My ancestors recently have been visiting me in my dreams, speaking to me in the language, telling me that they're proud, which is something that has never happened before. In Haida, there are many words and phrases which go beyond what the English language can express. And these words and phrases simply cannot be translated, not even close. And it's very common among our elders. You'll say, what does that mean? And they'll say, they'll try, but they can't tell you. There are just no words in the English language to translate what some of our expressions, emotions, feelings, and sayings are. So when I arrived back in school last September after my summer being spent almost entirely in the language, I struggled because my worldview had been shifted to the point where I had all of these things that I wanted to say, all of these things that I felt which couldn't be translated into English, and my grades and my GPA and my courses, they suffered because of that. And my transcript can reflect that they suffered because of that, because I had an entirely new vocabulary of things I wanted to say, what I wanted to research, what I wanted to tell people. But there were no words for me to tell people that unless you learned the language. I would go to write a paper with all of these great, beautiful ideas, and I go to write it, and I would go blank because there was no words for me to express what I wanted to say. Although that was a struggle, I don't see it as something negative. It's definitely something positive because, like I said, I'm seeing the world the way my ancestors saw, embraced, experienced, and lived their life and world, which is the way I should have been living and viewing my life from the day I was born. In Skidegate Haida, we have a word for language, which is quill, like I said. Our word for voice is also khil. I always say that by learning my language, I learned my voice as a Skidegate person. By learning my language and voice, I am one step closer, in my opinion, to decolonizing my colonized mind. And Adosti always says, how can we decolonize our colonized mind when we are thinking in the colonizer's language, in my case, English? Our healing begins with decolonization, indigenization, and reconciliation, things that revolve around that, although there's a deeper issue behind a lot of those terms. But these processes begin with ourselves. These processes begin with our languages. My name Yasnau means leads an exceptional life, given to me by my Uncle Ernie upon my birth. I believe by learning my language, I'm stepping closer to living up to the meaning of my name. Thank you for listening to my voice and my story.
Thank you. As you spoke to Louise and yes, now, I don't know if there's someone that's able to come into Ruby. I'm not sure how we run them. Jessica, are you there? Jessica, are you there? Jessica? What does that mean? Like Louise said, she didn't have any baggage, and I also actually didn't have baggage in that way. I excelled in this school system, this Canadian school system, but I wasn't really a Thompson. So this is where I'm kind of finding who I am as a Thompson person. So, Matthew for coming. Questions? Anyone have any questions?
Thank you.
I brought a group of social workers here. Are there anything you'd like to do your moment? Anything you'd like to tell the social workers? Yeah. Oh, wow. I've got a lot of things. I have a lot of things to say. But you want to say anything, Louise?
Yes. This whole thing about reconciliation, I looked at it and I thought, what was the problem in the first place?
Excuse me, Judy.
That,
is that you?
they didn't believe that Native people were people, just like they didn't believe that women were people. And people, we just forgot it. You looked at this whole race, and I did a research paper in my undergrad. And one of the questions I asked people is, who do you know as a Native person? And I asked 38 people from all walks of life. And we had like an hour to 2 hours interview. And out of those, of course, all the Native people knew people. On a personal level, they don't look at me and say, well, we know you. Okay, well, you can't count me as normal because I live in two worlds. So I flip back and forth, and I'm fine with that. But I think if people just remember that we're not a bunch called First Nations. I'm Louise, I'm Judy, I'm whoever else is out there. You know, we're just individual people, and if we just remember that, when those people come into your world and they have problems, you can change their color and they just be people, right? But sometimes our problems are a little more not our fault in one way, if you want to look at it this way. It's a part of a system that told my parents, you shouldn't teach English to your kids or Taxan to your kids because it'll spoil their English. And recognize that they're coming from a different way of believing, but they're still people, because we're all people.
Excuse me, Judy.
Yeah?
Oh, it's Jessica here. I couldn't unmute myself earlier.
Okay. I'm just going to
And I
ask a
actually
question.
haven't been able to I'm only on audio at the moment. I haven't been able to figure out how to get in otherwise.
I'm just going to quickly answer the question, and we're going to get you to just quickly share with the group, if that's okay, Jessica.
Sure.
So my response to share with social workers. So we've had residential schools. We had a lot of different policies that were put in place by the federal government. And then we had the 60s scoop, which didn't only happen in the 60s, right? So there were children removed from their homes. But all that was, again, based on people who weren't able to raise their children the way they were taught from their ancestors forward. So you have people that don't have those skills. They're learning from nuns and priests and whoever that's been hired to be in the residential schools. And so they don't know how to parent. And then what happens is their children get taken away from them because they don't have those skills or that knowledge. So it doesn't help. I mean, we need to look at the bigger picture. We need to deal with that system in place. And by removing children, it doesn't help. I mean, obviously sometimes there are situations, but it just happens, right? I mean, I've seen it so much. And there are times that it's much better to be in their homes than to be in someone else's home that doesn't love them and care for them. I mean, I think there's a lot of worse things happen to children that are removed. So obviously, as a social worker, you have a mandate. You've been told what you by whoever, the provincial government or whoever. But we need to look at this from a bigger picture and look at it from that perspective, and just know that there are a lot of people out there hurting, and they don't know. There's a lot of things they didn't learn from their families. So Jessica, I'm going to get you to speak now, okay?
Okay, so I still haven't, I think I almost have it, but.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Well, it's a bit different doing it this way, but Dinigate Sakaset Saizet, Jessica Craig Sitney, Sai Kaya Watsoden, Batasie, Lixamasu Habitasis Day, Mr. Dice, Saka Adisit, Hawatsa. So I just did my, just kind of a basic introduction in my language. I am Watsoden from Witset, BC, which is close to Smithers. I have been learning my language for a year and a little bit here. I started from square one, knowing absolutely nothing. Someone who grew up off reserve and rather culturally grounded, but still just far enough away. My mentor, so I work in the mentor apprentice program, and I work with my grandma, Catherine Michelle. Her traditional name is Wei Li. So for me, I found that learning has been a challenge, but an amazing challenge at that. I really thrive on working with my language or revitalizing my culture in any way that I can. I have 3 children, and so having that I grew up off reserve, when I had my children, I chose that I would move back to my community, and I wanted to instill as much culture as I can in my young 3 children. So I started with just like cultural practices, like going to feasts or simply being around my grandparents, who are like major knowledge keepers within my family, as well as joining a drum and dance group, which, like, our group is mostly made up of children, actually, which is pretty cool because there are tons of drum and dance groups out there, and I love listening to all of them because they've all got a little bit of their culture, but ours has a lot of children. So we start them like really young. There's some babies, and all our children do a lot of dancing. And so I started there with learning all of our songs, and all of our songs are in Wet'suwet'en. And so I started there, just learning every clan song and just knowing which ones I can sing, where I should sing them, the meaning behind them, the traditional teaching behind them. So I started there, and that was my son's 6, so I started when he was 1.5 years. So I've been in that group for about 5 years. So I know all of the songs and dances and their meanings, and some of the translations. I don't know all, but it's a work in progress for sure. And so my major thing that I'm working on right now is the mentor apprentice program. So I work with my grandma, and we do hours of just learning through immersion, which has proven to be really difficult for both of us. I think for myself, because I don't always know the proper way to ask or say something, and just trying to navigate through with my beginner phrases to be able to ask for what I'm trying to learn or what I'm trying to get at. And I think for my grandma as my mentor, I think it's really hard for her to take a step back and try to teach me, because she sometimes she'll fall into English, and that as well is just really hard for her to stay in Wet'suwet'en, because she knows I know how to speak, and she it's a totally different mindset if in comparison to if she was teaching a baby. So I definitely think that's like the hardest part, because she'll always say Wet'suwet'en, and that I don't know, so she doesn't really know what I'm trying to get at, or doesn't know what I'm asking. Yet if I go with her and sit with her and her sisters, she's got 3 sisters, they just talk in Wet'suwet'en, and it's so cool to just sit there and listen. And it's even neater to see my progress from the beginning, where I knew absolutely nothing. And this is only like 1.5 years ago. I knew next to nothing, like very minimal phrases, to now where they'll be talking and I can pick out a few words, and they'll ask me, do you know what we're talking about? And I'll be able to pick out a few words and be like, oh, I think you were talking about this and something about this. And they're like, oh, you're starting to get it. So I mean, there are those achievements that make me really happy with what I'm learning, as well as just little bits of information that my children hold and reiterate to me, which is also a big achievement in my eyes. I don't know, I really find that just learning the language and revitalizing my culture, that it really helps me find myself. Not that I was lost, but I feel really grounded in knowing more about my roots.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for calling in. Jessica's taking a directed studies course with me this term, First Nation Studies 223, which is First Nations Language Immersion, which Yasnal took with me last summer. So it's based on the work that she'll be doing and has been doing in the Mentor Apprentice program. And again, Jessica, I'm so grateful that you were able to finally call in with all the technology that we've, there's a lot of issues and we were able to overcome them. So Madhu, thank you so much.
Yeah, I was actually on when you asked if I was there, and I just didn't know how to unmute myself to say I was. And I think I finally figured out the video. I can see myself if I joined. Oh. Did I figure it out? I think I just seen you walk by.
Yay.
Oh, I see.
Okay. Well, hi.
Right at the end.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we probably got like 5 minutes to go, so we're just going to ask questions right now.
So I just want to thank you so much for coming, all of you, coming today. Really, for me anyway, illustrated the intersection between language revitalization and health and well-being. And I think it was such a treat for all of us here to hear your story and your experience. So thank you so much. I think it was a perfect start to our health seminar series of the year. The goal of this series was really to try to gather health researchers from across the university in various disciplines. And so we hope to see all of you again, maybe even if it's not in your area of health sciences. So I'm a biomedical scientist. I work in the lab, and I was absolutely taken with the talk today. So it's really beneficial to look outside your world and to understand how broadly it means to be a health researcher. And I think it's important for all of us, especially at a small university like UNC. What I found to be really advantageous is to be able to attend seminars like this. I did some of my training in large research institutes, which was just simply focused on what I do, that is, and I didn't have the opportunity to attend a seminar like this. So for all of you, and especially our students here today, I just encourage you to take the opportunity to really think what it means to be a health researcher and that you can learn in all of these different disciplines. So thank you so much for coming. We have a really mixed audience here, and people are really impressed. So thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Okay.
Keep looking in your inboxes for emails from Rachel. She'll be advertising the here full time messaging and to take a little break from the summer. So yeah, thank you again for everyone for coming. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And you're doing your work at home. Yeah. Do you have to go?